Now, next on our headlines, the Syrian war. Russia said it, quote, categorically rejects accusations of war crimes over the bombing of hospitals in Syria, which saw at least 22 people killed in the north of the war-torn country. The statement came after the United Nations said that directing attacks at hospitals and medical units would constitute a war crime. Meanwhile, Turkey continues pushing for ground operations in Syria, hoping for the involvement of the U.S. in a coalition against the Islamic State group. I-24 News defense correspondent Shaiban Ari has more.
Heightening tensions in northern Syria are threatening to further escalate a conflict which has been raging for almost 5 years and which has reportedly claimed nearly 500,000 lives. Turkish shelling of Kurdish forces in northern Syria continued for a fourth straight day Tuesday. The Kurds have made gains in recent days after taking advantage of a major Syrian regime offensive in the region, which has weakened local rebel forces backed by Turkey. Kurdish militia are now threatening to capture the town of Azaz, just 5 kilometers from the Turkish border. They have been supported by Russian air and missile strikes, which hit a number of hospitals Monday, killing nearly 50 people.
Russian jets have been bombing hospitals and schools for days. Your heart breaks when you see the pictures of these children who are massacred, bodies destroyed. Russia filed a complaint against Turkey today, just because we have taken precautions to protect our border. What a shameful, arrogant stance.
One Turkish official told journalists in Istanbul that Turkey is in favor of a ground operation, adding that without one, there would be no end to the Syrian conflict. But the official, who asked to remain anonymous, also said Turkey would not launch a unilateral operation, noting the issue was being discussed with allies. The stance is similar to the one taken publicly by Saudi Arabia, whose foreign minister said this week his country would only send ground troops to Syria if the U.S. launched its own major operation. But U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter has said numerous times the U.S. remains opposed to sending a standard ground force to Syria. Meanwhile, UN envoy Staffan de Mistura was in Syria Tuesday and met with Foreign Minister Walid al-Mualim.
We have been particularly talking about the issue about humanitarian unhindered access to all besieged areas.
De Mistura is hoping he can arrange the resumption of peace talks in Geneva between the regime and opposition after an initial ceasefire is put in place. But Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has meanwhile offered little reason for optimism.
They are saying they want a ceasefire in a week. Who is capable of gathering all the conditions and requirements in a week? No one.
For the time being, a cessation of hostilities is scheduled to begin by the end of the week, but there are few optimists on all sides.
Yes, let's go to Orlando, Florida now, where we're joined by Tom Harb, chairman of the American Middle East Coalition for Democracy. Good evening, Mr. Harb. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Good evening. How are you?
Well, Mr. Harb, I want to know how you respond today to Russia denying the accusations of war crimes in Syria. This comes, of course, over the bombings of hospitals. International view of this, as we know, has been quite critical. Would you agree to this dramatic conclusion that this does constitute a war crime?
I'm not sure if this is a war crime or not. We'll leave it up to the UN to determine eventually what's going on and what's going to happen. But all what we could tell is the situation is escalating by the day, and there really no superpower is trying to control the situation. The absence of the Western leaders gathering with to establish a plan they could execute. What they want to do with Bashar al-Assad, how they're going to remove him from power, who's going to control the ground, how the Arab nations are going to march into the land to take away from ISIS. In the absence of this, I think we're going to see more escalation and more bombardments either from the Russians, the Turkish, vice versa, and the Syrian government and so on. And the people on the ground are paying the price, and the victims are the children and the women and the elderly.
Yes, a particularly painful point you're making specifically because of the proposed Russian ceasefire that's yet to materialize. But Tom Harb, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm still joined in studio by Mohammed Al-Qasim. And Mohammed, as you tell us, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah today gave an address. Did he talk about the issues we're touching on tonight?
Absolutely. He talked mainly about or gave the Syrian issue a great deal of time. And he said that because of the failure of the Saudis and the Turks in Syria, now they are calling for a ground operation to invade Syria. And he said that Hezbollah will not allow ISIS, the Nusra Front, the US, the Americans, Saudi Arabia, Israel, to or any other tyrant government to control Syria. He sounded very optimistic. He sounded upbeat, as well as Bashar al-Assad, the president, the Syrian president, yesterday, and that gives credence that the Syrian army, as well as its allies, with the help, of course, of the Russian aerial bombardments, going forward, now they are controlling the ground, and basically they are dictating when to stop this escalation and armed escalation or military escalation with the rebels, as well as with ISIS. Now Turkey feels very pressured. They feel that they've given many red lines to the Kurds, and they said don't cross this line, and the Kurds crossed it, and then they said, well, okay, don't cross this line, and the Kurds crossed it again. So when, if any, the Turks will move forward and actually go into Syria and face the Kurds directly, no one knows. But I don't think that the Americans nor the UN is really interested in escalating the situation any more than it is already in Syria.
Yes, Hassan Nasrallah, another voice weighing in on Syria, and Tom Harp told us before, it's the people on the ground still paying the price.
Suffering the most, of course.
Suffering the most. Mohammed Al-Qasim, thank you very much for being with me tonight.